Today's VetGirl podcast is sponsored by Blue River Pet Care. The vet med field is always changing. So are you. Find the perfect practice for your DVM lifestyle with Blue River Pet Care. With nearly 200 locations across the country, you can choose to practice medicine in the mountains, among the bright lights of a big city, or anywhere in between. Advance your profession and your passions with a team that supports and celebrates each chapter of your life. Visit mydvmlifestyle.com to find the perfect practice for you. Hi, VETgirl here today, and super excited to speak with guest Kristi Lehman. Kristi Lehman, thank you so much for joining us for today's VETgirl podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You know, it's not very frequent that I get to interview someone in freezing cold Minnesota, so I'm excited to
I
talk to you
know
today.
we're neighbors.
Exactly. So we were both at University of Minnesota, but just so our audience knows a little bit more about who you are, what you do you mind giving us a little bit of background about where you trained and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a master's in social work from the University of Minnesota and an undergrad in psychology, also from the U of M. During graduate school, I did a one-year internship at the University of Minnesota Veterinary Medical Center, where I briefly worked with Janine Moga, who is wonderful, and I know she's on your team here. And after that, I, kind of was hoping to get into the field of veterinary social work. At the time, 12 years ago, there weren't a lot of opportunities to do that. So I was kind of keeping my options open, but I was contacted by Dr. Rebecca McComas, the founder of Minnesota Pets, our in-home euthanasia practice here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And she had an opening for a part-time kind of a receptionist position. So I took that on, and it has been wonderful. It's grown over the last 12 years. I'm now the vice president here at Minnesota Pets. And in 2016, I helped found our kind of sister company called DVM Center, which is a call center or a group of virtual receptionists that answer phones and schedule visits for other in home euthanasia practices around the country. So I've been doing that as well since 2016. And just in the last year or two, I've become involved with Blue River Pet Care, our parent company, and I'm a district operations specialist with them. So I help out the other in-home euthanasia practices that they own as well around the country.
Wonderful. We know so many kindred spirits. Love Janine Moga. We overlapped together when I was on faculty at the U from 2003 to 2008. And for all the Miami people out there, in Minnesota, they call University of Minnesota the U, which I know offends you, Miami, football players, but that's okay. And also, I actually just missed Rebecca McComas when she was on faculty at the U, but such a kindred spirit also.
Yes.
So you worked with some amazing people and really excited just to chat because there are so many aspects that I'm sure you learned from both of them working for Minnesota Pets, which is now DVM Center. So I absolutely love that. One of the reasons why I'm excited to talk to you today is because I wanted to talk to you about what inspired you to specialize in veterinary social work. Was it a personal experience or a specific event that led you down this path?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had pets my whole life. I grew up in rural Wisconsin, and so I've experienced, the full life cycle of pet ownership. And I did lose my one of my heart dogs in college, and it was just such a difficult experience. And it sort of felt, I was isolated already. I was away from home, and it was really, really difficult and kind of a shaping moment of my life. And when I went to grad school to study social work, I had other interests too. I've done, case management and child mental health work. And I was kind of listening in a lot of my classes and hearing a lot about, family systems and life adjustments and, trauma and grief and loss. And very rarely, maybe never, did I hear them talk about that in the context of, the companion animals in our lives. And I had, gone through experiences where it was just so important and pertinent. And I felt like we were missing a really big part of people's lives. And so I became more interested in it. And then, I learned even more at the college in my internship at the U of M. And so it sort of felt like a natural fit for me. And I got very lucky to find an actual, job in the field. There are more jobs these days in veterinary social work, but at the time it was pretty new. And so I've been very lucky. And I think over the years, my interests have grown too into leadership and, practice management using my social work lens, which I think is valuable. It helps me kind of make decisions for the practice that benefit our clients and our team. So I'm able to see things in a little bit of a different way.
Thank you for sharing that about your heart dog. I always say we have that one pet at some adult point in our life that oftentimes is our first adult pet. And very similar to you, one of the reasons why I'm passionate about making sure that we as a veterinary profession always stay empathetic is because when I lost my elderly pit bull to a glioblastoma, a brain tumor, I was one of those owners that jumped into a car. We were living in Minnesota, drove straight to CSU for stereotactic radiation therapy. And he was my buddy. He was like my number one heart dog, also. And I needed the social workers, I needed the professional support staff at Argus Institute at CSU just to help me with everything. And, it's something that we talk about euthanasia every single day in the veterinary clinic, whether or not you're in general practice, emergency practice, or specialty practice. But when we happen to be on the other side of the counter and it happens to us,
Yes.
it really makes us empathetic about it.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
I did want to talk about in-home euthanasia. A lot of people still, as pet owners, don't always know about this. I know my husband was a little traumatized having to drop off my cat to euthanize in the clinic, and he just didn't feel comfortable with in-home euthanasia until we did it with my second cat. So talk to us a little bit more about in-home euthanasia. It seems to be more of a new, non-traditional concept. Are you seeing more people, including pet owners, take this approach?
Yeah, absolutely. We have grown so much. I mean, even at Minnesota Pets, we started, it was just a very part-time job for Dr. Rebecca, and now it's busy enough. We're a 15 doctor practice now just in the Twin Cities. And DVM Center, I think they scheduled over 30,000 euthanasia visits just last year for other in-home euthanasia practices around the country. So it's becoming more accepted and I think more desired by pet owners. There's more CE available. There are certifications and academies, around euthanasia and in-home euthanasia. So it's definitely become a little bit more mainstream. And we experienced a big shift during COVID. Minnesota Pets increased the number of visits that we were seeing by 65% just between 2019 and 2021. So I think when clinics were moving to curbside and a lot of veterinary teams were just feeling, a lot of compassion fatigue and burnout, a lot of people were coming our way and we kind of struggled to meet the demand, but it's definitely become, I think, more accepted. And I think our society is becoming a little bit more death positive in a hands-on way. People want to be a part of that process and have some more active decision making. And so this kind of falls into that realm as well, I think.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I wouldn't want to repeat COVID again because COVID was
Mhm.
such a strain for every aspect of veterinary medicine, general practitioners not being able to practice, due to PPE, to emergency clinics. It was at a very, very busy one, and we went from a, 2 to 5 hour wait on Sundays to a 8 to 10 hour plus wait. So again, it was a really, really hard time for our field. And it resulted in a lot of burnout and compassion fatigue and loss of empathy, right? So I think that was really hard for us as a whole. Now, when it comes to pet owners, we obviously want to support them as best we can. What do you think is the most important aspect of supporting pet owners, especially when they're dealing with the emotional toll of a sick or aging pet?
Yeah, I think that, one of the most important things for professionals to know about pet loss is that it's a form of disenfranchised grief, which means it's not as, openly acknowledged or publicly supported as other losses in our lives, like the loss of a human family member. Whereas a lot of clients report that it's just as painful, in some cases more painful. And so that disenfranchised nature makes it even more valuable for us to acknowledge and validate and just kind of create that safe space for the client that we're here and we're comfortable with their grief. We are accepting of their grief. This is a safe space, to express and advocate for themselves. And then, while doing that, of course, maintaining self-awareness and taking care of ourselves too, because it's not easy to do that. And I know a lot of us in the veterinary field didn't receive that level of training for, that kind of client support. We are so focused on the patients and performing the procedures, but there's a whole other aspect that I think really comes into play at end of life with the client support piece of it. So it isn't as complex as I think sometimes we believe it might feel. It's really just creating that space and acknowledging and validating and helping with the disenfranchised piece of it.
Yeah, that's a great terminology. I hadn't been aware of disenfranchised grief, but you're so right, especially pet owners. they feel such a strong bond that when they're trying to express their grief to someone who may not have any pets, they just don't get it. Right.
Hmm.
I can say for myself, when I had to euthanize my pit bull, who thankfully survived 13 months with stereotactic radiation therapy, a lot of people in my life did not understand or thought it was ridiculous amount of money that I paid to do his stereotactic radiation therapy and his veterinary care. It was the cost of a car. And,
Right.
some people just don't understand that. So it can be quite difficult because we don't feel that sympathy or that empathy from our loved ones.
Yeah.
Now, while we often think of the family first, and rightfully so, when it's time to say goodbye to a beloved pet, how does this type of work impact the actual veterinarians who are euthanizing?
Yeah, the research on this is really interesting and the answer is very complex, but it is, of course, it's a heavy moment. It's a very important moment. So there's a lot of pressure on us as professionals to get it right. That's heavy to carry around. One of the things that I find interesting is that as veterinary professionals, there's not a lot of curriculum, there's not a lot of, training, there's not a lot of communication support for how to support families through the decision or through the actual, loss. And if you compare it to human medicine, those things do exist a little bit more, even though veterinarians experience death 5 times more than physicians. And so there's that element of, not feeling quite the preparation or training that we might want to have. One of the things that the research is pretty clear about is that we are more impacted in situations where there's a level or an element of moral distress. So, when it's a situation where we don't quite feel comfortable with what we're being asked to do, or we see a clear, path forward that we feel right about, but it's not necessarily, what we can do based on the client's wishes or resources or policies, things around us. And so when that comes into play, it really impacts veterinarians strongly. There have been a few studies on that, and it's been very clear. In cases outside of, when there really isn't that moral dilemma, the family feels supported and they feel, ready. The pet, it's medically appropriate, to help with euthanasia. In those situations, it's actually interesting that, it doesn't cause the compassion fatigue that I think we would imagine it would. Those are situations where some studies have suggested that it's a protective experience, that we actually feel compassion satisfaction, which is the opposite of compassion fatigue. So while it is sad, anyone who is involved would say this is a sad event to be a part of. It also feels really good to be able to help in a lot of these cases. And I think that kind of speaks to what I've seen at Minnesota Pets. I mean, I came into this work expecting that it would just be very short term or part time because who can do euthanasia work all day, every day? This is just, something I'll do and then I will not be able to do it anymore. And I've found the exact opposite. It's been so fulfilling. And I hear that from our team a lot too. And I've just become really fascinated in how this work is different and how it impacts our team differently than they felt impacted maybe at a busy ER or a busy GP practice.
Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of veterinarians, especially the ones I work with in really busy emergency rooms, we often view euthanasia as a gift, right?
Hmm.
Which they don't have in human medicine. And my dad has severe Alzheimer's, and I was talking with his neurologist. And, it's hard because we prioritize quality of life versus extension of lifespan in human medicine. And so it can be really, really hard. And I do agree in the ER, at least, you do have that burnout that can happen from some of the moral and ethical decisions that you do have to make when it comes to the decision to euthanize or not having that right to euthanize, where that decision, is declined.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Now, euthanasia can be challenging, as I mentioned, for hospital teams, and it can be difficult when there are several in one shift. I remember working one Thanksgiving, and it was a brutal, long, busy shift, and I had euthanized 5 patients that day after working for hours on some of them. And I remember driving home and just sitting in the driveway, and I just turned off the car and cried for a little bit, stayed in the car for, 5 minutes before I walked into the house. It often seems that performing only euthanasia for entire shifts every day could lead to compassion fatigue quickly. What do you see in this work?
Yeah, not to say that, no one in this line of work ever experiences compassion fatigue or burnout. I myself have definitely from, speaking to clients day in and day out and our doctors, especially, during COVID when we were just every visit was full. Doctors were, going from home to home. There were fewer breaks, I think, than we typically would want to have. And so we have had times like that. I think we all have, but it has been very different. And a lot of our doctors have kind of come to our practice from situations where they were experiencing compassion fatigue and burnout in their setting. And they came to our practice. And it took me some years to kind of understand this dynamic that I was seeing that someone would want to leave GP where they're, helping puppies and sometimes saving and doing these things, playing with kittens, things that I thought at the time were going to be, a part of their work that we wouldn't be able to offer them. And it's been really different. I mean, our doctors feel, and they've reported feeling really fulfilled by the work that we do. The clients are, I mean, the level of gratitude is unlike anything I've seen in other settings. Clients are just so thankful that someone is able to help them with this. And our doctors have built-in time, to focus on that one family. And then they also have some built-in decompression time, which I think doesn't exist in some settings. They have to drive to the next visit, which sometimes is 10 minutes away and sometimes it's an hour away. And I mean, in the Minnesota winter, sometimes that in itself can be stressful, or construction season, I guess it's one season or the other. But the driving sometimes is a lot, but it does give them a chance to, kind of reflect on the visit, listen to music, listen to a podcast, call a friend or family member, stop and take a break. That doesn't, that structure doesn't typically exist, and that's really protective.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for all that you do. It is such an important role to have a veterinary specific social worker. Obviously, I have so much love for Janine Moga, who you worked with at the U. And I think it's so amazing that, both of us are Minnesotans, that we have a social work program at University of Minnesota that does allow for specialization within the veterinary field because we need it, right? So many large veterinary clinics could benefit, especially specialty emergency clinics could benefit from having a licensed social worker specifically focused in veterinary medicine, not only for our clients, but also for our own staff. And from my understanding, I'm going to meet you live in person, which I rarely get to do. Nowadays, I only meet people, via Zoom or Teams, but I'm really excited. I understand you're going to be at VETgirl U exhibiting with Blue River Pet Care. Is that correct?
Yes, I will. I'll be at the Blue River booth, so be sure to stop by and say hi. I'd be happy to meet everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And where can people go to find more information?
So if you are experiencing, compassion fatigue or burnout, for sure feel free to stop by and see me at the booth. I would love to talk with you and, talk with you about what your practice is doing. And if you're feeling stuck, if you feel like you're looking to make a change in your career, there are options out there. There are, places to go that will feel good for you and match what you're looking for with your lifestyle. You can visit www.mydvmlifestyle.com to learn more and see what kind of options are available.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it and look forward to meeting you in person.
Thank you.